In Las Vegas's roaring arena, a silver-haired icon sat quietly in the front row, while a cocky veteran strutted under the lights, hungry for attention. What began as a simple martial arts exhibition turned deadly serious when a fading star decided to rewrite the script. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical retiree. For decades, he was the face of discipline and destruction. A six-time world karate champion and special forces trainer, known for dispatching opponents with ruthless efficiency and unshakable calm. When Van Damme taunted and pushed too far, he had no idea he was awakening a storm. Norris stepped forward with quiet resolve, delivering a measured response that would shake the arena and humble the man who had challenged him. What began as a boastful performance would become a brutal lesson. The Vegas crowd would never forget the night Chuck Norris reminded the world that legends don't fade, they wait. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Las Vegas arena pulsed with raw energy, every seat filled, every voice blending into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished fighting ring at center stage. Cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners, others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the fighters warming up backstage, visible on the massive screens suspended above. Tonight marked the most anticipated martial arts exhibition in decades. Legends and Lions, they called it a showcase, bringing together the greatest fighters across generations. The pay-per-view numbers had already shattered records. Social media buzzed with predictions and rivalries. But inside the arena, the atmosphere felt different, almost sacred. This wasn't just entertainment. It was history unfolding. Among the VIPs seated ringside, many faces drew attention: actors, fighters, trainers, but one figure commanded a special kind of reverence: Chuck Norris. At 75, he moved with the same controlled precision that had defined his career, settling into his front row seat with quiet dignity. He wore a simple black button-down tucked into jeans, his weathered face framed by silver hair. He nodded politely at those who recognized him, but his eyes remained fixed on the empty ring. The master had arrived, and he'd come to observe, not perform. 3 rows back, a group of young MMA fans pointed at him, their excitement palpable. "That's actually him," one whispered. "My dad made me watch all his movies." "Old school," another replied. "But the man still got that look. That look, the one that made you straighten your posture without realizing it." Chuck settled in, hands resting lightly on his knees. No entourage surrounded him. No handlers managed his space. He didn't need them. Even now, decades past his competitive prime, his presence created its own gravity. Fighters who passed him on their way to the locker rooms instinctively bowed their heads. Legends recognized legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the arena, "welcome to the most extraordinary night in martial arts history. Tonight, the past meets the future as legends and lions share one ring." The crowd erupted, the roar so powerful it vibrated the floor. On the screens, highlights played of tonight's featured fighters, clips of lightning-fast knockouts, gravity-defying kicks, submission holds that made viewers wince. Each new face drew cheers, but when the montage shifted to footage of the veterans, the arena's energy changed. These weren't just fighters. They were architects of an art form. The first exhibition matches began rising stars, demonstrating their skills, respectful exhibitions of technique and control. The crowd appreciated the display, but anticipation for the main attractions simmered beneath every cheer. Backstage cameras occasionally cut to the legends preparing, each glimpse feeding the frenzy. 2 hours in, as the evening built toward its crescendo, the announcer's voice returned, pitched higher with excitement. And now, making his way to the ring, the muscles from Brussels, the universal soldier, the most dangerous man on the planet, Jean-Claude Van Damme. The arena lights dimmed, replaced by flashing blue beams that swept across the crowd. "No mercy." Baikaze thundered through the speakers, bass so heavy it rattled the chairs. The entrance tunnel filled with smoke as a silhouette appeared, arms raised high. Jean-Claude Van Damme emerged through the haze, strutting down the aisle with the same cocky swagger that had made him famous. At 64, he still cut an impressive figure. Lean, muscular, his face tanned and taut. He wore black fight shorts with a custom gold-trimmed jacket, the collar popped high. His bleached hair was swept back, and mirrored sunglasses reflected the camera flashes that greeted him. "The legend is back, baby," he shouted, playing to the nearest camera as he flexed. The crowd roared, some in genuine admiration, others laughing at the spectacle. Jean-Claude fed on both reactions equally, spinning to give every section of the arena a chance to see him. He leapt onto the ring apron and executed his iconic split on the ropes, holding the pose for several beats longer than necessary. "Still got it," he shouted, dropping down into the ring and circling it, playing the showman perfectly. His eyes scanned the crowd, drinking in the attention. When his gaze fell upon Chuck Norris, however, his pace slowed. The veteran fighter was watching him without expression, hands still resting calmly on his knees. Something flickered across Jean-Claude's face, a momentary tightness around his mouth, a slight narrowing of his eyes. Then the moment passed, replaced by an even wider grin as he resumed his circuit of the ring. From the commentator's booth, Joe Rogan's voice filled the arena. Van Damme looking incredibly fit for 64, showing off that signature energy. And yes, that is Chuck Norris seated ringside tonight. What a treat for the fans to have these martial arts film legends under one roof. His co-commentator nodded enthusiastically. Two very different approaches to the art. Norris built his career on quiet discipline, while Van Damme has always been about the spectacular. Looking at them now, those differences seem starker than ever. The exhibition schedule called for Van Damme to demonstrate his famous kicks against a training partner, followed by a light sparring session. But as he finished his lap of the ring, he grabbed the microphone from the ring announcer's hand. "Change of plans," he announced, voice echoing. "I'm feeling good tonight. Too good for rehearsed moves." He pointed to the tunnel where fighters emerged. "I want a real challenge. Bring me one of these young lions I keep hearing about." The production team scrambled. This wasn't part of the program. After a brief, confused silence, the announcer reclaimed his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems Jean-Claude Van Damme is calling for an impromptu exhibition match." The crowd buzzed with excitement at this unexpected turn. Backstage, producers conferred hurriedly with the fighters who were scheduled to appear later. Most shook their heads. They had prepared specific demonstrations, not freestyle matches against a legend, however past his prime. Finally, a hand raised. Alex Chen, 28. A rising star in kickboxing with 3 championship belts to his name. He hadn't been scheduled to fight tonight, just demonstrate techniques, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. "I'll do it," he said to the producer. "Light contact only, right?" The producer nodded, relieved. "Just an exhibition. 3 minutes. Keep it technical." Alex nodded, already wrapping his hands. He'd grown up watching Van Damme's films, studying those kicks before he ever stepped into a real dojo. This wasn't just an exhibition. It was a chance to share the ring with childhood inspiration. Back in the arena, Van Damme was working the crowd, shadowboxing and showing off his still impressive flexibility. When the announcement came that Alex Chen had accepted the challenge, he clapped his hands together dramatically. "Good. Someone with courage. Let's see what the new generation has learned from watching me. In the front row, Chuck Norris remained still, his expression unchanging as he watched Van Damme perform. Only the slightest tightening around his eyes revealed his thoughts. He'd known Jean-Claude for decades, had watched him rise, fall, and struggle for relevance. What he saw now wasn't the fighter he once respected. It was a man desperate to prove he still mattered. 3 minutes later, Alex Chen emerged from the tunnel. No elaborate entrance, no music, just a young fighter in black shorts and a red rash guard, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet as he approached the ring. His face showed equal parts excitement and focus. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about sharing the canvas with history. As Alex climbed through the ropes, Van Damme approached him, arms spread wide for a hug that the cameras could capture. "The young tiger," he announced loudly, patting Alex on the shoulder. "Let's give them a show, yes?" Alex nodded respectfully, bowing slightly. "Honored to share the ring with you, sir." Van Damme returned the bow with a theatrical flourish, then circled back, playing to the crowd once more. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to see if he can touch the master. The exhibition rules were simple. Light contact, technical focus, showcase skills, rather than power. As the timekeeper signaled ready, Alex settled into his stance, hands high, weight balanced. Across from him, Van Damme struck his iconic pose, one arm extended forward, the other cocked by his face. The bell rang, and the dance began. At first, it was exactly what an exhibition should be. Alex moved fluidly, throwing technical combinations that Van Damme blocked or avoided with veteran savvy. Van Damme responded with his trademark spinning kicks, executed with surprising agility for his age, though lacking the explosive power of his prime. The crowd appreciated the display, applauding the cleaner exchanges. 1 minute in, Van Damme executed a perfect spinning heel kick that stopped just short of Alex's head. The young fighter nodded in acknowledgement, appreciating the control. Van Damme, however, seemed to take the nod as something else, a sign that the young lion was playing too safe. "Come on!" he shouted, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "This is not dance class." He pressed forward more aggressively, his strikes coming harder, faster. Alex adjusted, maintaining the exhibition spirit while matching the increased intensity. But something was changing in the ring. Van Damme's eyes had narrowed, his expression hardening. Each exchange grew sharper, the crack of shin against forearm padding louder. At ringside, Chuck Norris leaned forward slightly, his calm demeanor unchanged but his attention sharpened. He recognized the shift in energy, had seen it countless times in fighters whose ego overrode their discipline. With 30 seconds remaining, Van Damme threw a roundhouse kick that Alex blocked, the impact audibly harder than exhibition rules allowed. Several spectators looked at each other, unsure if what they were seeing was still part of the show. Alex maintained his composure, nodding again to acknowledge the exchange, but his eyes had narrowed slightly. Then came the moment that transformed the night. As the 10-second warning sounded, Alex executed a perfect technical combination. Jab, cross, low kick, textbook form, with controlled power. Van Damme, perhaps frustrated by the young fighter's composure, countered with a hook that carried full fighting weight behind it. The punch caught Alex on the temple, snapping his head sideways, sending him staggering back 2 steps. The crowd gasped. This was no longer an exhibition. Before Alex could reset, Van Damme pressed forward, launching a front kick that drove into the younger man's midsection with enough force to expel the air from his lungs. Alex dropped to one knee, eyes wide with surprise rather than pain. The bell rang, signaling the end of the round. But Van Damme wasn't finished. He circled the kneeling fighter, arms raised to the crowd, playing the conqueror. When he turned back to Alex, who was now rising to his feet, His face wore a sneer visible to everyone in the first 10 rows. "Too fast for you?" he taunted, voice pitched to carry. "Maybe stick to point fighting in the dojo." The arena went quiet. This wasn't showmanship anymore, it was disrespect. Alex said nothing, simply nodding once before turning toward his corner. But Van Damme wasn't ready to relinquish the spotlight. He grabbed the microphone again, circling the ring, as Alex quietly exited. "That," he announced, "is the difference between movie fighters and real fighters." He was breathing hard, but his voice carried strong through the arena. "Anyone else want to try?" From his seat in the front row, Chuck Norris watched silently, his weathered face revealing nothing, as the younger man exited the ring with quiet dignity. But in his eyes, something had changed, a hardening, like steel tempering in fire. The exhibition resumed its scheduled programming, but the atmosphere had shifted. Van Damme remained in the ring, basking in the aftermath of his unexpected dominance over Alex Chen. The crowd's reaction had split. Younger fans cheered the display of aggression, while others murmured their disapproval. The commentators worked overtime to frame what they'd just witnessed. "Well, that escalated quickly," Joe Rogan observed, keeping his tone professional. What was supposed to be a technical exhibition turned into something with a bit more intensity. His co-commentator nodded. Van Damme clearly wanted to make a statement tonight. "Let's hope Alex is okay after that last exchange." Backstage, medical staff attended to Alex, checking him for signs of concussion. The young fighter waved them off. "I'm fine," he insisted, though a red mark bloomed across his temple where Van Damme's hook had connected. "It just caught me by surprise. Wasn't expecting full power in an exhibition." The event producer approached, concern etched across his face. "That wasn't part of the program. I'm sorry, Alex." Alex shook his head. "Not your fault. Some guys can't turn it off, I guess." He reached for a towel to wipe his face, his composure intact, despite the public humiliation. Or maybe they've got something to prove. Back in the arena, Van Damme had commandeered the microphone again, pacing the ring like he owned it. Sweat glistened on his forehead, but his energy seemed to have doubled. The taste of dominance had awakened something in him, a hunger for more validation, more attention. "Who's next?" he called out, scanning the crowd. "Any other young lions want to test themselves against experience?" He executed a spinning kick for the cameras, his technique still impressive despite his age. This is what real fighting looks like. In the front row, Chuck Norris remained motionless, his expression neutral as he observed Van Damme's display. To casual observers, he appeared merely attentive. But those who knew him recognized the slight tension in his jaw, the only outward sign of his disapproval. Beside him, an older trainer leaned over. "Quite a show Jean-Claude's putting on," he commented. Chuck nodded once, his voice quiet when he finally spoke. "That's the problem. It's all show." Van Damme continued his circuit of the ring, each boast louder than the last. The scheduled programming had effectively been hijacked, leaving the producers scrambling to adapt. The next demonstration fighter was refusing to enter the ring until order was restored. 20 years in films, and I can still do this," Van Damme shouted, executing another high kick that drew approving whistles from his supporters. "Not bad for an old man, yes?" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. His gaze swept the arena again, lingering this time on the VIP section, specifically on Chuck Norris. Something shifted in Van Damme's expression, a calculation forming behind his eyes. The spotlight he'd created wasn't enough, he needed more. "Speaking of old men," he continued, pointing directly at Chuck, "we have royalty with us tonight. The great Chuck Norris, sitting there so quiet. Cameras swiveled toward Chuck, his image appearing on the giant screens overhead. A cheer rose from the crowd, respectful, admiring. Chuck acknowledged it with a slight nod, his composure unbroken. "Stand up, Chuck," Van Damme called, gesturing dramatically. "Let the people see you." The request bordered on demand, putting Chuck in an awkward position. To refuse would seem petty, but to comply would feed into whatever game Van Damme was playing. With characteristic grace, Chuck rose briefly, raising a hand to acknowledge the crowd, then seated himself again. Brief, dignified, controlled. But Van Damme wasn't satisfied. He sensed an opportunity, a chance to position himself alongside a legend, or perhaps above one. His voice took on an edge of challenge, wrapped in forced camaraderie. "The man. The myth. But you know, Chuck, the game has changed since your day. It's faster now, more dynamic." He performed another spinning kick for emphasis. "Today's fighters would run circles around the old techniques." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The implication was clear enough. Chuck's style was outdated, obsolete. Several faces turned to gauge Chuck's reaction, but the veteran fighter remained impassive, hands resting on his knees, gaze steady. Van Damme, emboldened by the reaction he'd provoked from the crowd, pressed further. "Why not join me in the ring, Chuck? For old time's sake. Show these kids what the Walker Texas Ranger can still do." He spread his arms wide, playing to the cameras. Or maybe time has finally caught up with the legend. The question hung in the air, weighted with insinuation. Around the arena, phones lifted higher, recording every moment. This wasn't part of the program, this was real drama unfolding, the kind that sold tickets and generated headlines. In the commentator's booth, even Joe Rogan seemed taken aback. "Wow. Van Damme really putting Chuck Norris on the spot there. That's, bold." His co-commentator cleared his throat. "I'm not sure challenging Chuck Norris is ever a good idea, regardless of age." Near the ring, Alex Chen had returned, standing quietly at the edge of the floor section, watching the scene unfold. The mark on his temple had darkened, but his eyes were clear as they shifted between Van Damme and Norris. Van Damme, sensing he had the arena's complete attention, doubled down. "What do you say, Chuck? One round? Or are you only comfortable fighting with camera tricks and stunt doubles these days?" He laughed, making it sound like good-natured ribbing, but the barb was unmistakable. A tense hush fell over the crowd. The challenge had crossed from promotional banter into disrespect. Even Van Damme's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Still, Chuck didn't move, didn't speak, didn't change his expression, but something in his eyes had hardened, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. Van Damme, misreading the silence as hesitation, pressed his advantage. "No? Too risky for the brand?" He turned to the crowd, arms spread wide. "This is the difference, people. Some of us are still warriors. Others, well, they protect their image." He executed another spinning kick, this one higher, flashier a peacock's display. Then he pointed directly at Chuck again, voice carrying through the arena. "The truth is, some legends are just that, legends, stories we tell. But real fighters, we prove ourselves every day." The insult landed like a physical blow. Around the arena, people exchanged glances, uncomfortable with the direction the night had taken. This wasn't entertainment. It was becoming ugly. Near the timekeeper's table, the event organizer spoke urgently into his headset, trying to wrest back control of his production. "Get ready to cut his mic. We need to move this along." But before any intervention could occur, something changed in the arena. A shift in energy, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Chuck Norris had stood up. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The simple act of rising to his feet silenced every voice in the arena. He removed his jacket, folding it neatly and handing it to the person beside him. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, a man who had never needed to rush. The crowd, sensing what was happening, began to stir. Murmurs built into a chant. Chuck! 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 Van Damme, still in the center of the ring, watched Norris's movements with growing awareness that his game might have backfired. He recovered quickly, covering his momentary uncertainty with bravado. Ah! He accepts. Ladies and gentlemen, this night just became historic. But Chuck wasn't playing to the crowd. Wasn't acknowledging the cameras. His focus had narrowed to the man in the ring, the one who had crossed the line between promotion and disrespect, between showmanship and arrogance. He walked to the ring steps with the same measured pace that had defined his career, no wasted movement, no theatrics. Just purpose, given physical form. As he climbed through the ropes, the arena erupted. Phones lifted higher. Social media notifications exploded across thousands of screens. Chuck Norris was about to fight. Inside the ring, Van Damme's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. This was what he'd wanted: the spotlight, the moment, but now that it was happening, something felt different. The energy had shifted. He was no longer directing the show. He was part of something else, something he hadn't scripted. Chuck stood across from him, dressed in his simple black button-down and jeans. No fight gear, no preparation. He didn't need it. At 75, his body was still a weapon, honed through decades of discipline that had never faltered. Chuck Norris, ladies and gentlemen, Van Damme announced, trying to reclaim control of the moment. The legend himself. Let's see if he can keep up with... No microphone, Chuck interrupted, his voice quiet but carrying. No cameras. No talk. He moved to the center of the ring. Just you and me. Jean. Claude. Since that's what you wanted. Van Damme's smile flickered, then reasserted itself. He handed the microphone to the referee, then turned back to Chuck. Arms spread wide. As you wish, old friend. Exhibition rules, yes? Light contact? The question carried a hint of uncertainty. The dynamic had changed, and Van Damme was suddenly the one seeking parameters. Chuck didn't respond. His silence was answer enough. The referee looked between them, sensing the tension. 3-minute exhibition round, he said. Though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. That's what would happen. Clean fight, gentlemen! Van Damme nodded enthusiastically, bouncing on the balls of his feet, playing to the crowd one last time before the bell. The Battle of Legends! Let's give them a show, Chuck. But Chuck wasn't there to perform. He had come to teach a lesson, one that Van Damme had forgotten somewhere. Between fame and desperation. The bell rang. Van Damme circled left, still bouncing, hands high in his classic stance. The showman to the end. Chuck remained centered, his guard relaxed but ready, eyes never leaving his opponent. Your move, Chuck said quietly. And so it began. The bell's echo had barely faded when Van Damme launched his first attack, a lightning-fast jab followed by a roundhouse kick aimed at Chuck's midsection. The combination was executed with surprising speed for a man in his 60s. His technique still sharp after all these years. Chuck slipped the jab and blocked the kick with a simple forearm check that absorbed the impact completely. No wasted movement, no flourish, just efficient defense that made Van Damme's attack look almost theatrical by comparison. The crowd roared its approval. Phones raised high to capture every moment. This wasn't just an unexpected exhibition match. It was martial arts history unfolding in real time. Van Damme reset, circling again, his confident smile still in place, but his eyes more focused now. The first exchange had told him something important. Chuck Norris, at 75, was still Chuck Norris. Not bad for an old man. Van Damme called out, loud enough for the front rows to hear. But defense alone won't impress anyone. He pressed forward with a more complex combination jab, cross, spinning back kick, the sequence that had made him famous in his films. Each strike was technically precise, carrying more power than appropriate for an exhibition. Again, Chuck's response was methodical. He parried the punches, sidestepped the kick, and countered with a single straight right that stopped just short of Van Damme's chin. A demonstration of control that was more statement than attack. 20 seconds in, and the nature of the contest was becoming clear. Van Damme was fighting to prove something. Chuck was there to teach something. In the commentator's booth, Joe Rogan couldn't contain his amazement. Look at the economy of motion from Norris. Van Damme is throwing everything with full power and speed, and Chuck is just neutralizing it. Incredible. His co-commentator nodded. This is the difference between someone who learned martial arts for films and someone who lived martial arts before films. Norris was a legitimate world champion before Hollywood ever came calling. Van Damme, sensing the narrative slipping from his grasp, increased his aggression. His next attacks came faster, harder, a flurry of strikes designed to overwhelm rather than showcase skill. The exhibition pretense was evaporating with each exchange. "Come on, Chuck," he taunted, voice edged with frustration. "Show us. You can still fight, not just defend." Chuck remained centered, his breathing calm, his movements precise. Where Van Damme's techniques grew increasingly showy flying kicks and spinning strikes that drew gasps from the crowd, Chuck's responses remained controlled, efficient, and increasingly effective. He wasn't fighting for the audience. He was engaged in something more fundamental. 1 minute into the round, Van Damme launched a spectacular jumping spinning kick, the move that had defined his career, executed with surprising height and rotation despite his age. It was aimed at Chuck's head, carrying knockout power behind it. The arena collectively held its breath. Chuck didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, inside the arc of the kick, and with one fluid motion swept Van Damme's supporting leg from beneath him. The impact of Van Damme hitting the canvas echoed through the arena. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in appreciation of what they'd just witnessed. It wasn't a violent takedown. It was physics applied with perfect timing, turning Van Damme's own momentum against him. For a moment, Van Damme lay on his back, blinking up at the arena lights, genuine surprise written across his face. This wasn't how the story was supposed to unfold. Chuck stepped back, allowing him space to rise, saying nothing. Van Damme scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off, trying to laugh it off for the crowd. "Good move, Chuck. I was going easy, but now we fight for real." "Yes?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, pride wounded, ego threatened. The next sequence of attacks came with bad intentions. Any pretense of exhibition forgotten. A hard right hook aimed at Chuck's temple. A knee strike that would have damaged ribs had it connected. A front kick driven toward the sternum with enough force to send someone through the ropes. None landed as intended. Chuck's defensive skills hadn't diminished with age, if anything. They'd refined into something approaching art. Each attack was redirected, neutralized, or avoided with such efficiency that Van Damme began to look increasingly desperate. The contrast was becoming starker with each exchange. Van Damme sweating profusely, breathing hard, movements growing wilder. Chuck composed, economical, his breath steady, his focus absolute. "Stand still and fight," Van Damme shouted, frustration breaking through his showman's facade. Chuck responded not with words but with his first real counter of the match, a straight right hand that snapped Van Damme's head back, followed by a sweep that once again put him on the canvas. The sequence was so fast, so clean, that many in the audience only registered what happened after Van Damme was already down. This time, the fall was harder. Van Damme tasted blood where his teeth had caught his lip. The shock on his face was visible to the entire arena, captured and magnified on the overhead screens. The crowd's reaction shifted. The cheers took on a different quality, respect rather than spectacle. They were witnessing something authentic, not just a contest of techniques, but a clash of philosophies. Van Damme rose again, slower this time, the swagger gone from his movements. For the first time that night, uncertainty showed in his eyes. He had started this confrontation certain of the outcome, confident in his ability to dominate the narrative. Now he found himself in unfamiliar territory, the reality beneath the image he'd cultivated. With 90 seconds left in the round, Van Damme changed tactics. If he couldn't overwhelm Chuck with speed or power, perhaps he could provoke him into a mistake. "Is this all the great Chuck Norris has left?" he called out, circling more cautiously now. "Just defense and takedowns?" The fans came to see a fight. Chuck didn't respond to the taunt. His eyes remained locked on Van Damme, tracking every movement, every telegraph. When the next attack came, a probing jab followed by a right cross, Chuck slipped both punches and countered with a short hook to the body that buckled Van Damme momentarily. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was precisely placed, a surgeon's strike rather than a brawler's. The message was clear: I can hit you whenever I choose. Van Damme's face darkened. The pretense of friendly competition had completely evaporated now. He was being systematically dismantled, not just physically but psychologically. Each exchange reinforced what the audience had already begun to understand, that there were levels to this game that went beyond showmanship. "At least give the people what they paid for," Van Damme shouted, desperation creeping into his voice as he launched another combination. Jab, cross, hook, high kick. Chuck's response was another lesson in efficiency. He bobbed under the punches, blocked the kick, and drove a clean counter straight right into Van Damme's solar plexus. The impact folded Van Damme forward, air evacuating his lungs in a visible rush. He staggered back 2 steps, mouth open in a silent gasp. The crowd winced collectively. Not because the strike had been excessive, but because its precision made the gap between the fighters painfully evident. With 30 seconds left in the round, Van Damme was facing something worse than defeat irrelevance. The narrative he'd tried to create, the aging action star still dominant, still dangerous, was unraveling with each exchange. What remained was a man desperately swinging at shadows, while reality closed in around him. Chuck hadn't even broken a sweat. "Time!" the referee called, stepping between them. Van Damme stood at his corner, breathing heavily, his earlier bravado replaced by simmering frustration. This wasn't going according to his script. The crowd's energy had shifted, the chants of "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck," growing louder, more unified. As the timekeeper signaled the round's end, something cracked in Van Damme's composure. He wasn't ready to relinquish the spotlight, to accept the lesson being taught. Before the bell could sound, he lunged forward, launching a leaping sidekick at Chuck's head, a sucker punch disguised as eagerness. Had it connected, the fight would have ended differently. But Chuck, despite his years, possessed something that transcended physical reflexes: awareness. He saw the attack coming before Van Damme had fully committed, reading the desperation in his opponent's eyes. What happened next unfolded in slow motion for those lucky enough to be watching closely. Chuck pivoted slightly, letting the kick sail past his head by mere inches. In the same fluid motion, he trapped Van Damme's leg at the apex of its extension, the moment of greatest vulnerability. Then, with control that belied his age, He swept Van Damme's supporting leg, while simultaneously driving his forearm into the younger man's chest. The takedown was textbook perfect. Van Damme hit the canvas with enough force to bounce, landing flat on his back, limbs splayed in ungraceful surrender. The impact echoed through the suddenly silent arena. Chuck stood over him, neither celebrating nor taunting. His expression remained neutral, his breathing steady. He'd responded to disrespect not with anger but with mastery, a lesson delivered through action rather than words. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Not the referee, not the timekeeper, not the stunned audience. They were witnessing something few had ever seen. Chuck Norris, in an actual confrontation, unscripted and authentic. Then the arena erupted. The roar was deafening raw appreciation for what they'd just witnessed. Phones captured the moment from every angle as Van Damme lay motionless on the canvas. The fight and the narrative definitively settled. Chuck stepped back, giving his fallen opponent space, his demeanor unchanged. He hadn't come to humiliate, he'd come to demonstrate. The lesson had been delivered. As medical staff rushed into the ring to attend to Van Damme, Chuck turned and walked calmly to the ropes. No victory dance, no posturing for the cameras. Just quiet dignity as he exited the ring the same way he'd entered it on his own terms. The chants followed him. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. A tribute not just to what he'd done tonight, but to everything he represented. Discipline over flash, substance over spectacle, respect over ego. Van Damme remained on the canvas, staring up at the lights, the taste of defeat bitter in his mouth. The narrative he'd tried to write had been rewritten by reality, a reality where showmanship crumbles when confronted with authentic mastery. As Chuck descended the ring steps, returning to his seat with the same measured pace, the arena stood in unified respect. Even Van Damme's most ardent supporters applauded, recognizing that they had witnessed something rare. Not just a physical victory, but a philosophical one. In the commentator's booth, Joe Rogan shook his head in amazement. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why Chuck Norris doesn't need to talk about how tough he is. Actions have always spoken louder than words, and tonight was a master class in that principle. His co-commentator nodded solemnly. Some lessons can only be taught in the ring. I think Jean-Claude Van Damme just received an education he won't soon forget. As the medical team helped Van Damme to his feet, the crowd's attention remained fixed on Chuck Norris, now seated calmly in his front row position, watching as he had been all night with quiet attentiveness. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he'd just participated in one of the most unexpected moments in martial arts history. That was the final lesson of the night. True masters don't need to announce their victories. They simply return to stillness, ready for whatever comes next. The arena buzzed with electric energy as Chuck Norris resumed his seat, the crowd still on their feet, phones raised high to capture the aftermath of what had just transpired. Security personnel formed a protective barrier around the VIP section, though Chuck himself showed no concern for his safety. He simply adjusted his jacket, folded his hands in his lap, and continued observing the proceedings with the same quiet attentiveness he'd displayed all evening. Medical staff surrounded Van Damme in the ring, checking his vitals and helping him to a seated position. Blood trickled from his lower lip where his teeth had cut into it during the fall. His eyes were clear, no concussion but something else clouded them, the unmistakable shadow of humiliation. The cameras that had captured his every boastful moment earlier now documented his defeat in merciless high definition. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice cut through the commotion, struggling to regain control of the event. An unexpected exhibition match between legends Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chuck Norris. Let's show our appreciation for both these martial arts icons. The crowd responded with thunderous applause, though it was clear from the chants still echoing through the arena who they considered the victor. Van Damme acknowledged the reaction with a weak wave, his customary swagger replaced by stiffness as he was helped to his feet. The production team scrambled to redirect the event back to its scheduled programming. In the commentator's booth, voices spoke in hushed, reverent tones. "I've been covering combat sports for 20 years," Joe Rogan said, "and I've never seen anything quite like that. The efficiency, the timing." Chuck Norris at 75 just schooled a man 11 years his junior. His co-commentator nodded. "What strikes me most isn't the physical performance. Impressive as that was, but the composure. Not a word, not a taunt, not even a celebration. Just the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to prove." Throughout the arena, fans turned to each other, processing what they'd witnessed. Veterans of the sport explained to younger spectators the significance of what had just happened, not just a physical confrontation, but a philosophical statement about the essence of martial arts. "Did you see how he never threw a strike until Van Damme forced him to?" A seasoned kickboxing coach explained to the group seated behind him. "That's the old way. Violence as a last resort, not a first option." Near the ring, Alex Chen, the young fighter who had been on the receiving end of Van Damme's earlier aggression, watched with quiet satisfaction. The red mark on his temple still throbbed, but the sting of humiliation had been replaced by something else. Validation. The lesson Van Damme had needed to learn had been delivered. Not by Alex, but by a master of the art. Van Damme himself was now seated in his corner, an ice pack pressed against his lip, his gaze fixed on the floor. The production team had wisely cut away from him on the main screens, focusing instead on the next scheduled exhibition. But the damage was done. In an age of smartphones and social media, his defeat was already circulating globally. The narrative no longer his to control. Security approached Chuck, leaning down to speak quietly in his ear. "Mr. Norris, we can escort you out a private exit if you'd prefer to avoid the crowd." Chuck shook his head, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "No need," he replied. "I came to watch the fights. I'd like to stay." This simple response, this commitment to the original purpose of his presence, spoke volumes. He hadn't come seeking confrontation or attention. He'd come out of respect for the art form he'd dedicated his life to. That Van Damme had forced a deviation from that purpose was unfortunate, but not enough to drive him away. As the next exhibition bout began, cameras occasionally cut to Chuck in his seat, capturing his attentive observation, his occasional nod of appreciation for a well-executed technique. Nothing in his demeanor suggested he'd just participated in what was rapidly becoming the most talked-about moment of the night. Backstage, the promotion's owner paced nervously, phone pressed to his ear as his legal team outlined potential liability issues. What had transpired wasn't part of any contract, any insurance policy. But even as he worried about the legal ramifications, he couldn't deny the publicity value of what had just happened. Ticket prices for tomorrow night's event were already surging on resale sites. Social media engagement had exploded, and requests for media credentials had flooded in from outlets that normally ignored martial arts entirely. "Make sure the footage is secured," he instructed his production manager. "Multiple angles. This is going to be in the promotional material for years to come." In the medical room, Van Damme sat alone, having dismissed the doctors after basic treatment. A production assistant had brought him his phone, which now lit up with notifications, messages from friends, family, colleagues, all wanting to know what had happened, if he was okay, what he'd been thinking. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he stared at his reflection in the black mirror of the screen when it went dark. The face looking back at him seemed older somehow, the lines deeper, the eyes less certain. He had entered the arena believing one story about himself and would leave with that narrative shattered. Van Damme had spent decades crafting an image, The dangerous fighter, the martial arts master, the action star still relevant in a changing world. In 3 minutes, Chuck Norris had systematically dismantled not just his techniques but the very foundation of that carefully constructed identity. The production assistant returned, hovering nervously in the doorway. "Mr. Van Damme? They're asking if you'll be ready for your scheduled demonstration in 20 minutes? Van Damme looked up, the question pulling him from his thoughts. Would he crawl back to the spotlight after what had just happened? Hide in the locker room? Leave the arena entirely? After a long moment, he nodded. "I'll be there. Sometimes." The greater courage was in returning to face the consequences of your actions. Back in the arena, the scheduled program continued. Demonstrations of technique, light sparring matches, interviews with legends of the sport, but an undercurrent ran beneath every moment. The unscheduled confrontation had changed the tenor of the entire event. Midway through a kickboxing exhibition, a murmur spread through the crowd as Jean-Claude Van Damme emerged from the tunnel. His entrance was subdued this time. No music. No elaborate posturing. He walked directly to the ring, climbed through the ropes, and approached the center. The audience's reaction was mixed. Some applauded. Others whispered among themselves. Many simply watched in curious silence. Van Damme stood for a moment, absorbing the response, then raised his hands, gesturing for quiet. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual bravado, carrying instead a note of genuine reflection. "Tonight did not go as I planned," he began, a self-deprecating smile softening the admission. "I came here, wanting to show that I still belong in the conversation. That age hasn't diminished what I can do." He paused, his gaze sweeping the arena before settling, briefly, on Chuck Norris, still seated in the front row. "But I was reminded of something important. Something I forgot somewhere between movie sets and red carpets." Van Damme touched his split lip gingerly. "Martial arts isn't about who can talk the loudest or kick the highest. It's about respect, discipline, humility." The crowd had gone completely silent, captivated by this unexpected turn. Chuck Norris didn't need to prove anything tonight. He never has. That's the difference between a true master and someone just playing the part. Van Damme shook his head, a rueful laugh escaping him. "I got a private lesson from one of the greatest. Expensive, but worth it." He turned toward Chuck, offering a formal bow, deep, respectful, genuine. Chuck acknowledged it with a nod, his expression softening slightly in recognition of what the gesture represented. Not surrender, but growth. "Now," Van Damme continued, straightening up, "I'm supposed to demonstrate some techniques. But I think we've all seen enough of my fighting for one night." This drew a laugh from the crowd, easing the tension. "Instead, I'd like to invite Alex Chen back to the ring to show properly what an exhibition between professionals should look like." From the side of the arena, Alex looked up in surprise at the mention of his name. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, making his way to the ring. What followed was everything the earlier exhibition wasn't: controlled, technical, respectful. Van Damme and Alex demonstrated combinations, defenses, counters, each acknowledging the other's skills without ego or aggression. When they finished, the applause was genuine appreciation, not just for technique, but for the spirit of what martial arts was meant to be. As Van Damme exited the ring, he paused at the ropes, looking once more toward Chuck Norris. Something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. Then Van Damme descended the steps and walked back toward the tunnel, his posture straighter, his step lighter, carrying himself with something that had been missing earlier: genuine dignity. In his seat, Chuck allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't come to the exhibition looking for confrontation, hadn't wanted to teach a public lesson, But perhaps some lessons needed to be learned the hard way, especially by those who had forgotten the foundations upon which their success was built. The night continued. Other fighters demonstrating their skills, other legends sharing their wisdom. But everyone in the arena knew they had witnessed something beyond the scheduled program, a moment of authentic martial arts philosophy played out in real time, where respect had ultimately triumphed over ego, substance over spectacle. And as the event drew toward its conclusion, Chuck Norris remained exactly where he'd been from the beginning, watching quietly, attentively, embodying the principles that had guided his life long before cameras had ever captured his image. Not because he was playing a part, but because that was simply who he was. The exhibition's scheduled programming had finally regained its momentum after the unexpected confrontation between Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Demonstrations of various martial arts continued on the main floor, each met with appreciative applause from the still buzzing crowd. But beneath the surface of the organized spectacle, currents of tension remained unresolved. Backstage, Jean-Claude Van Damme sat alone in the fighters' preparation area, ice pack discarded, staring at his reflection in a wall-mounted mirror. The cut on his lip had stopped bleeding, but the bruise to his ego ran far deeper. His public acknowledgement of the lesson Chuck had taught him had been genuine, a moment of clarity born from humiliation. But as the adrenaline faded, other emotions rose to take its place. Resentment, shame, and beneath it all, a gnawing fear that tonight had permanently altered how the world would see him. A production assistant appeared in the doorway. 15 minutes until the closing ceremony, Mr. Van Damme. All featured fighters are requested on stage. Van Damme nodded wordlessly, watching the young man retreat. 15 minutes until he would have to face the crowd again, stand beside Chuck Norris and other legends as equals. When tonight had proven so definitively that they were not. He reached for the bottle of water on the table beside him, but his hand moved past it, finding instead the flask he'd stashed in his bag earlier. The whiskey burned his split lip but dulled the edge of his thoughts. One swallow, then another. Liquid courage for what was to come. By the time Van Damme emerged from the preparation area, the alcohol had worked its way into his bloodstream, blurring the sharp edges of his humiliation and replacing them with something more dangerous: false confidence. He walked with exaggerated swagger toward the staging area where fighters were gathering for the ceremony, nodding at those who caught his eye, ignoring the whispers that followed in his wake. Chuck Norris was already there, speaking quietly with several veteran martial artists, his manner relaxed but respectful. When Van Damme approached, the conversation stilled, eyes turning toward him with varying degrees of caution. "The man of the hour," Van Damme announced, his voice slightly too loud, his smile too wide. "Our champion, Chuck Norris." Chuck regarded him steadily, noting the glassy quality of his eyes, the slight sway in his stance. "Jean-Claude," he acknowledged with a nod. "Good demonstration with Alex. That's what tonight was supposed to be about." Something in Chuck's measured tone, the implicit reminder of Van Damme's earlier behavior, caused a flare of anger to cut through the alcoholic haze. "Yes, very nice and proper," Van Damme replied, the artificial pleasantness in his voice barely concealing the bitterness beneath. "Everyone playing their part. The young talent, the wise master," his smile tightened, "the washed-up action star who doesn't know when to quit." The other fighters exchanged uncomfortable glances. Chuck's expression remained neutral, but a watchfulness entered his eyes, the awareness of a potentially volatile situation. "Nobody here thinks that," Chuck said quietly. "Don't they?" Van Damme stepped closer, alcohol and injured pride forming a dangerous combination. "You made sure of it. One demonstration for the crowd, the great Chuck Norris putting me in my place." "That wasn't my intention," Chuck replied, his voice remaining calm. You issued a challenge. I accepted. What happened in the ring speaks for itself. What happened? Van Damme said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Is you humiliated me in front of millions. After all my work decades building a career, fighting for every opportunity, you took it away in 3 minutes. The production manager approached, oblivious to the tension. 2 minutes, gentlemen. Places for the ceremony, please. Chuck turned to follow, but Van Damme grabbed his arm, stopping him. The other fighters tensed, sensing the shift in energy. We're not finished. Van Damme hissed, the alcohol erasing whatever wisdom he had gained from their earlier encounter. That wasn't a real fight. No preparation, no rules, no fair chance. Chuck looked pointedly at Van Damme's hand until he released his grip. When he spoke, his voice remained measured, but carried an undercurrent of steel. You had exactly what you wanted, Jean-Claude. An audience, a spotlight, and a chance to prove yourself. He met Van Damme's gaze directly. The results don't change just because you didn't like them. Something snapped in Van Damme's alcohol. Fogged mind, the last thread of restraint severed by Chuck's calm assessment. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, throwing a wild haymaker aimed at Chuck's head. The punch never landed. With the same efficiency he'd displayed in the ring, Chuck sidestepped the attack, redirecting Van Damme's momentum with a simple forearm block that sent him stumbling past. Several fighters moved to intervene, but Chuck raised a hand, stopping them. This isn't necessary, he said, addressing Van Damme's back as the younger man regained his balance and turned to face him, fury and alcohol overriding judgment. No more talk, Van Damme snarled, assuming a fighting stance. No audience. No cameras. Just you and me, for real this time. The other fighters had backed away, forming a loose circle around the two men. Security personnel at the edge of the staging area had noticed the commotion and were moving toward them. But the confrontation was developing too quickly for their intervention. Chuck shook his head. Disappointment, rather than anger in his expression. This won't solve anything, Jean. Claude. Fight me! Van Damme demanded, throwing another combination jab, cross, hook with full force behind each strike. Chuck's defense was once again impeccable, each blow deflected or avoided with minimal movement. He wasn't fighting back, merely neutralizing Van Damme's increasingly desperate attacks. This only fueled the younger man's rage. The fact that Chuck wouldn't even dignify his assault with counterattacks. Is this how the great Chuck Norris fights? Van Damme taunted, circling for another angle of attack. Just defense? No wonder you hid behind camera tricks all those years. The verbal jab was designed to provoke, to force Chuck into engaging. Instead, it earned only a look of profound disappointment. The kind a teacher might give a student who had failed to learn the most fundamental lesson. Fighting isn't about proving you're better than someone else, Chuck said quietly, his voice carrying despite the commotion. It's about proving you're better than you were yesterday. The philosophical response only enraged Van Damme further. He charged forward, launching a spinning kick aimed at Chuck's head, his signature move. Executed with desperate power. What happened next unfolded in slow motion for those watching. Chuck didn't avoid the kick this time. Instead, he stepped into it, catching Van Damme's leg at precisely the right moment, not to throw him as he had in the ring, but to control the attack's energy. In one fluid motion, he swept Van Damme's supporting leg, while simultaneously guiding him to the ground. The takedown was controlled, almost gentle, designed to neutralize rather than punish. Van Damme found himself on his back, Chuck kneeling beside him, one hand firmly but not painfully restraining his shoulder, the other raised in a clear signal to security that their intervention wasn't needed yet. It's over, Chuck said, his voice pitched for Van Damme alone. Let it be over. For a moment, Van Damme struggled against the hold, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Then, as suddenly as the storm had risen, it broke. The fight drained from him, replaced by something more vulnerable, the naked truth beneath the persona he'd constructed. "Why?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "Why can't I beat you? I trained just as hard, dedicated my life just as much." Chuck released his hold, helping Van Damme to a seated position as security personnel finally reached them. Hovering uncertainly at the edge of the scene. "Because you're fighting for the wrong reasons," Chuck replied simply. "You're fighting to prove something to everyone else. I only ever fought to prove something to myself." The truth of the statement hit Van Damme like a physical blow. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain or even humiliation now, but from the clarity that comes when self-deception is finally stripped away. Security moved closer, but Chuck waved them back, keeping his attention on Van Damme. "It's not too late," he continued, his voice gentle now, "to remember why you started this journey in the first place. Before the fame, before the movies, when it was just you and the art." Van Damme looked up, meeting Chuck's gaze through eyes that were clearing both from tears and from the fog of alcohol and wounded pride. For perhaps the first time that night, he truly saw the man before him, not as a rival, not as an obstacle, but as a mirror, reflecting what he might have become had he made different choices. "I don't know if I can find my way back to that," he admitted, the confession raw with honesty. Chuck rose to his feet, extending a hand to help Van Damme up. "You can," he said simply, "if you want to badly enough." After a moment's hesitation, Van Damme accepted the offered hand, allowing Chuck to pull him to his feet. The two men stood face to face. No audience except the circle of fighters who had witnessed the entire exchange. Martial artists who understood, perhaps better than anyone, the deeper meaning of what had just transpired. "Gentlemen," the production manager called, breaking the moment, "they're waiting for you on stage. The ceremony is about to begin." Chuck nodded, turning toward the stage entrance. But before he could take a step, Van Damme reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, not to stop him this time, but to connect. "Thank you," he said quietly, the two words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. Chuck acknowledged the thanks with a nod, then began walking toward the stage, Van Damme falling into step beside him. They moved not as adversaries now, but as practitioners of the same discipline, different in style and philosophy, but united by something more fundamental than their differences. As they approached the stage entrance, Chuck paused, turning to Van Damme with a hint of a smile. "By the way," he said, "I've always thought your kicks were technically excellent. Better rotation than mine ever had." The unexpected compliment, genuine, specific, professional, caught Van Damme off guard. For a moment, he stared in surprise. Then a smile spread across his face, not the camera-ready grin he'd worn earlier, but something more genuine. "Coming from you," he replied, "that actually means something." Together, they walked onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause from the crowd, who had no idea of the private battle and subsequent reconciliation that had just taken place backstage. They took their places among the other martial arts legends. Standing side by side, the night's unexpected drama transformed into something approaching mutual respect. In the arena's front row, Alex Chen watched the two veterans on stage, noting the subtle change in their dynamic. As a young fighter, he had grown up admiring both men for different reasons. Van Damme for his spectacular techniques, Norris for his unwavering discipline. Now, witnessing them standing together after everything that had transpired, he understood something crucial about the path he had chosen. True martial arts transcended the physical techniques. The real mastery wasn't about who could kick higher or punch harder. It was about confronting your own ego, facing your limitations, and emerging stronger, not despite your defeats, but because of them. On stage, Chuck Norris stood quietly as the ceremony continued. His composed presence, a living embodiment of the principles he had demonstrated throughout the night. Beside him, Jean-Claude Van Damme had stopped performing for the crowd, his usual theatrics replaced by a more thoughtful demeanor. Two different paths, two different philosophies. But in this moment, both illuminating different aspects of the same timeless truth. That the greatest battles are not fought against others, but against ourselves. Dawn broke over Las Vegas, the harsh desert sun cutting through the night's lingering shadows. In a private dining room at the Bellagio, Chuck Norris sat alone at a corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee as he scrolled through news headlines on his phone. Martial arts legend schools action star. Chuck Norris proves age just a number in unexpected showdown. Van Damme challenged, Norris answered. Inside the Vegas confrontation. Each story featured variations of the same footage, the moment in the ring when he had taken Van Damme to the canvas, captured from multiple angles, replayed in slow motion, analyzed by sports commentators and martial arts experts alike. What had transpired as a personal lesson was now global entertainment, dissected and debated across every platform. Chuck set the phone aside, returning his attention to the breakfast before him. He had never sought the spotlight, had accepted it as a necessary component of his career, but never craved it the way some did. Last night's events, and the subsequent media frenzy, only reinforced his preference for privacy. A discreet knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he called for the visitor to enter, he was surprised to see Jean-Claude Van Damme standing in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a simple black t-shirt, a far cry from the flashy outfit he'd worn the previous evening. "May I join you?" Van Damme asked, his voice subdued, the cockiness of the night before completely absent. Chuck nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Van Damme sat down, declining the coffee a hovering waiter offered. When they were alone again, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped before him. "I owe you an apology," he began, meeting Chuck's gaze directly. "Not just for last night, but for many things over the years." Chuck remained silent, giving the younger man space to continue. "I have not always shown proper respect," Van Damme admitted. "To the art. To those who came before me. To you." He glanced down at his clasped hands. "Last night made me see things I have been running from for a long time." Outside the window, the Las Vegas Strip stretched toward the mountains, gaudy casino lights still visible despite the growing daylight artifice against the backdrop of natural majesty. "Why did you come to the exhibition?" Chuck asked. His first words since Van Damme had entered. "What were you really looking for?" The question cut to the heart of the matter, bypassing polite evasions. Van Damme considered it for a long moment, his face reflecting the internal struggle of a man confronting uncomfortable truths. "Validation," he finally answered, the admission clearly difficult. "Relevance. Proof that I still matter in a world that has moved on." He gestured toward the window. "Out there, new stars rise every day. Younger. Faster. The spotlight moves. And when you have lived in it for so long, you forget who you are without it." Chuck finished for him. Van Damme nodded, a flash of genuine vulnerability crossing his face. "I built my life around being seen, being recognized. The moment that stops..." He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Chuck studied him, seeing beyond the bravado and flashy exterior to the insecurity that had driven last night's behavior. He recognized it because he had witnessed it countless times throughout his career, talented fighters whose identity became so entwined with their public image that they lost sight of their foundation. The martial arts were never about being seen, Chuck said quietly. They were about seeing clearly, understanding yourself, finding balance between strength and control, power and restraint. I know this, Van Damme replied, a note of frustration entering his voice. In here. He tapped his head. I know it. But somewhere along the way, he made a gesture, like something slipping through his fingers. The cameras changed things, Chuck acknowledged. For both of us. The difference is what we were seeking before they ever started rolling. The observation landed with precision. Van Damme fell silent, absorbing the truth of it. His journey had begun with genuine passion for martial arts. But somewhere between Brussels and Hollywood, the applause had become more important than the practice. Is it too late? He finally asked, the question weighted with decades of choices. To reclaim the path? Chuck shook his head. It's never too late to remember why you began. The question is whether you want the discipline more than the adoration. Before Van Damme could respond, both men's phones buzzed simultaneously, news alerts lighting up their screens. The night's confrontation had exploded across social media, generating millions of views, thousands of comments, dozens of think pieces analyzing what it meant for martial arts culture, action, cinema, aging stars. Van Damme glanced at his screen, then pushed the phone away with a grimace. And now, it becomes another spectacle, another performance for public consumption. Only, if you let it, Chuck replied. What happened in that ring was between you and me. What happens next is up to you. Through the window, the morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across the strip. In the distance, a group of tourists had gathered outside the hotel, phones raised, hoping to catch a glimpse of the martial arts legends reportedly staying inside. News traveled fast in the digital age. I'm supposed to begin filming in Hong Kong next month, Van Damme said after a long pause. Another action film, more of the same. He looked up, meeting Chuck's steady gaze. But before that, I was thinking of spending some time at a monastery in Thailand. A place I trained briefly when I was young, before fame. Something shifted in his expression, resolution forming from reflection. Perhaps I need to remember what it felt like, before the spotlight. Chuck nodded, understanding the significance of the decision. The quiet can be clarifying, he said, when it's just you and the practice. No audience, no validation, except the knowledge that you're honoring the discipline. Like you've done, Van Damme observed. Even with all the success, you never seem to lose that center. I've wavered, Chuck admitted. Fame tests everyone. But I was fortunate to have teachers who reminded me that the applause is fleeting. The practice remains. Outside the window, the crowd of onlookers had grown. Security personnel had formed a perimeter, keeping the gathering fans at a respectful distance from the hotel entrance. Word had spread that both Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme were inside. Van Damme noticed the crowd, a flicker of his old expression crossing his face, the performer sensing an audience. Then, deliberately, he turned away from the window. I should let you finish your breakfast in peace, he said, rising from the table. Thank you. For the lesson. Both of them. Chuck nodded, accepting the gratitude, without need for elaboration. Both men understood what had transpired first in the ring, then backstage, and now here in the quiet of morning. Some teachings didn't require words. As Van Damme reached the door, he paused, turning back with a hint of his familiar grin, though tempered now with something more genuine. Perhaps in a year or two, We could do another exhibition, he suggested. A proper one this time. Two veterans demonstrating technique. No ego, no competition, just respect for the art. I'd like that, Chuck replied simply. After Van Damme departed, Chuck remained at the table, finishing his coffee as he gazed out at the Las Vegas landscape. The city was a monument to spectacle, to the human hunger for entertainment and excess. Yet even here, authentic moments could emerge from beneath the artifice. Truth cutting through performance, substance outlasting style. His phone buzzed again, with another news alert. Without looking at it, he switched the device to silent mode and returned it to his pocket. Whatever narrative the media constructed around last night's events was their business. He knew the reality. As did Van Damme. That was enough. Later that day, as Chuck made his way through the hotel lobby toward a waiting car, he was approached by Alex Chen, the young fighter who had been on the receiving end of Van Damme's aggression at the beginning of the previous night's drama. "Mr. Norris," Alex said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to thank you before you left." Chuck shook the offered hand. "No need for thanks. I didn't do it for you." "I know," Alex replied with a small smile. "That's partly why it meant so much. You stood for something, not someone." He hesitated, then continued. "I've trained in martial arts since I was 5. Won championships, earned black belts. But last night showed me how much I still have to learn about what really matters in the discipline." Chuck studied the young fighter, saw the genuine hunger for understanding in his eyes. It reminded him of himself at that age, seeking not just techniques but meaning. "The physical skills are just the beginning," Chuck told him. "The real mastery comes in knowing when to use them, and more importantly, when not to." Alex nodded, absorbing the wisdom with evident appreciation. "I'd be honored if I could train with you sometime. Not for publicity or anything, just to learn." The request was sincere, unmarked by the ambition that often accompanied such approaches. Chuck considered it for a moment before reaching into his pocket and retrieving a business card. "My ranch in Texas," he said, handing the card to Alex. "I train there 3 months of the year. No cameras, no spectators. Just work." Alex accepted the card with reverence, recognizing the opportunity for what it was: not a photo op or career advancement, but a genuine chance to deepen his understanding of the art he had dedicated his life to. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste the opportunity." As Chuck continued toward the exit, he passed a newsstand displaying the morning papers. His own face stared back at him from several front pages, alongside Van Damme's, with headlines proclaiming the showdown of legends. He didn't break stride to examine them. Outside, the desert sun beat down on the strip, its unforgiving clarity cutting through the manufactured glamour of the casino facades. A small crowd had gathered behind barriers, phones raised, hoping to catch a glimpse of the martial arts icon. When they spotted him, a cheer went up. Chuck acknowledged them with a simple nod before sliding into the waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, he gazed out at the passing scenery of Las Vegas, a city built on illusion, where people came to escape reality, to indulge in fantasy. Last night, in a rare moment of authenticity, the curtain had been pulled back. Beneath the spectacle of entertainment, real principles had been demonstrated. Real lessons taught and learned. Whether those lessons would last beyond the viral videos and news cycles remained to be seen. For Jean-Claude Van Damme, the path forward would require confronting the hollowness that fame alone had created in his life, reconnecting with the foundations he had neglected in pursuit of applause. For Alex Chen, the journey was just beginning, a young fighter with technical skill, now awakening to the deeper philosophy that gave those skills meaning. And for Chuck Norris, The unexpected role of teacher had simply been an extension of the principles he had lived by all along. That true strength requires no validation. That respect cannot be demanded, only earned. And that the greatest battles are won not with fists or feet, but with the disciplined spirit that guides them. As Las Vegas receded in the rearview mirror, Chuck turned his thoughts toward home, toward the quiet practice that would continue long after the spotlight had moved on, just as it had begun long before the cameras ever found him. Because that was the final lesson of the exhibition, though few would fully grasp it. When the show ends and the audience departs, what remains is not what you performed, but what you embodied. Not what you claim to be, but what you truly are. In a world increasingly driven by spectacle, that quiet truth endured a reminder that beneath the noise and flash of entertainment, the ancient wisdom of martial arts remained unchanged. Respect is not announced with words, but demonstrated through actions. Not claimed by ego, but earned through character. And in that truth, both the master and the student, the legend and the challenger, could find their way forward beyond the ring, beyond the spotlight, to the place where authentic practice begins. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.